Good morning. So before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of, for many of us, the First Nations and Native American peoples. So here where I am in Vancouver, those peoples are the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. But I know where many of you are, you're on the land of other nations. And please feel free to put those nation names in the chat. Always, but especially during this difficult time and in honor of National Indigenous Peoples Day, let's remember our connection to our siblings in these nations. Let's pray for the day in which we might be with them in right relationship. So welcome. Welcome to Living Interfaith. Know that the whole of you is welcome. You're not asked to leave who you are in your own homes. Please bring who you are in with you. But what you are asked to remember is that everyone around you has brought who they are in with them as well. And all of goodwill are welcome. When you're ready, let's start out by singing.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, whoever you are, though you've broken your vows of thousands times over, ours is your vows of thousands times. Come, yet again come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bruce and Cheryl. So I have just a few announcements before we get going. The first is that for those of us here in the Vancouver area in the Lower Mainland, we will be having our first in-person event today for the first time in literally years. So it is raining, so I'm sorry about that, but what are we going to do? It's going to be an in-person potluck barbecue at Trout Lake or John Hendry Park. So it's the same area. It's in Vancouver, kind of a bit in like the East Van area. It'll be from 2 to 5 p.m. today, Pacific Daylight Time, for anyone who's interested. And this invite is open to all. So we're going to meet on the south side of Trout Lake near the playground and where they have the ice cream. Please bring a food or drink item to share if you can. So there's an open invitation, so all are welcome. And this is in celebration of those of us who graduated last weekend. Our very own Bryn just got ordained as an Anglican minister, which is very exciting. And since he's not here, I can say it's also a surprise birthday party for him. And I know he won't get to the recording. So please come out if you can and celebrate him. So yes, that should be fun. This coming Friday, the Vancouver Sufi Dances of Universal Peace are going to be meeting in person. It'll be Friday, June 24th from 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. They're going to meet at St. Margaret's Cedar Cottage Anglican Church. So that is at about 22nd and Dumfries, over by Knight Street and Kingsway. And they'll be dancing. I don't know if you all have gone to a Universal Dances of Peace. They're so beautiful. They take a couple hours and they take sacred phrases and prayers from all different faith traditions, usually a minimum of 5, but more like 10 in a given meeting. And then they do a song and then a folk dance kind of movement to go with those prayers. It's about bringing the wisdom from the different faith traditions together and then celebrating with others. So it's really quite beautiful. So if you're interested, that'll be next Friday. And I know there's going to be an event. I don't think she's here with the details yet, but I know the local Baha'i community is going to have an event on Monday night in honor of National Indigenous Peoples Day. And Hereditary Chief Phil Lane is going to be speaking, but I don't have the other details. So if Dolores Dooley shows up later, we can ask her about it. But that's what I have. Does anyone have any other events they'd like to acknowledge right now? Okay, that's all right. Well, if you think of any, feel free to put them in the chat. And otherwise, let's just come into silence for a moment. I have a prayer from Diane Climatage. Creator God, we look at your world and praise you for the diversity all around us. Thank you for the gift of relationship, our connection with people, animals, and the land. Help us, Holy One, to see differences and diversity as strengths. Help us to listen and understand, to meet one another with wonder and anticipation. Help us to love as you love, without expectation. Reveal to us your way of reconciliation and guide us into right relationship with all living things. Lead us to understand how Indigenous peoples have been and continue to be profoundly harmed by settler people and institutions. Lead us to repent when those of us who are settlers deny Indigenous people respect, dignity, and fullness of life. Help us to listen compassionately, to speak humbly, and to act justly. Help us to seek the peace, justice, and reconciliation that you desire among all your children. And thank you for your mercy and grace. Amen. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. From Malcolm Niachon. And now if you'd like to unmute, we can offer one another a sign of peace. So feel free to say something like, peace be with you as well. Salam alaikum wa alaikum assalam.
Peace be with everybody.
Peace to
Be
all.
with you. Shalom alaikum.
Peace, everyone.
Peace to you.
Peace to
Love,
everybody.
safety.
Peace.
everyone.
And comfort in your hearts.
Beautiful. Thank you. When you're ready, let's sing.
Faithful, faithful is our God. Kamanaoi o kokakua. Faithful, faithful is our God. In love there is no one more faithful than our God, who brings the light into the darkness, the God who shares the breath of life in you and me, all living things upon the earth. Kamanaoi o kokakua. Faithful, faithful is our God. Kamanaoi o kokakua. Faithful, faithful is our God. In quiet moments, God whispers tenderly the mystery of unending love. For God is good and holds us as we sleep, to wake us to the morning light. Kamanaoi o
Beautiful. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Bruce and Cheryl. Fantastic. I see Carolyn asked, was that a ukulele?
Definitely.
Wonderful. I love your repertoire. Thank you so much. It's just beautiful. Now, if you'll join me in our joint affirmation. We come together in peace. We sing together in joy and with love. We worship together in one house, a house with names beyond number. Our paths are many, our beliefs are as leaves, and the tree that we cleave to is nourished by the light of compassion, justice, and mutual respect. May our lives, our beliefs, and our actions help to bring about the world of love we all seek, and let it begin here. Beautiful. Now is when we usually pray in our own homes and in our own ways for something in the world. There are so many things that need our prayers and that call our attention. I know many of us are still grieving over the recent mass shootings in the US. I have a friend who has a 2-year-old in daycare and was informed they were going to do active shooter training at the daycare. And so I think certainly that could use our prayers. Also yesterday, I was at the church Canadian Memorial, and there's a memorial service for a very young teen who passed away because of the opioid crisis. So if we could also pray for those suffering because of addictions and fentanyl and just these kind of issues in our communities, it would be much appreciated. Let's take some time right now to pray. Thank you. When you're ready, let's sing.
Way
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Now is when I usually say that I would pass around a basket in person. Instead, I'm just getting our little donation page here. I'm just gonna put this in the chat. Thank you so much to those of you who donate. So many of you already donate so much time and funds and energy helping keep this community thriving. So thank you for all that you do. Also, I know Stephen will shoot me an angry look if I don't mention that if you have some extra money, it'd be good to send it to Doctors Without Borders. They're doing such important work, especially right now. So we want to highlight them and their good work. And always, but especially this week with National Indigenous Peoples Day, you have some extra funds in addition to send to the Indian Residential School Survivor Society. That would also be much appreciated. It's coming up, it's right around the 1-year anniversary of when they found the 215 children's bodies in Kamloops last year. And I know it's been such a tough year and years for our Indigenous friends and siblings. So any money to support them as well would be much appreciated. Are there any other causes that we want to highlight at this time? Or if not, when you're ready, let's sing.
Come from you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And now it's my joy to turn it over to my friend Kauanoe. She and I just graduated together at the Vancouver School of Theology. She's been there, I think, around the same amount of time I have been, for about 5 years or so. But she's been doing it while in Hawaii on the beautiful island of Kauai this whole time. And she's amazing. I already am at fault for being in school forever, but I'm pretty sure she's like delving right into a PhD program if she is not already. So I'm very impressed with that. And she's doing some amazing work there. So she's joining us today to share a bit about the Kanaka Maoli, or the Hawaiian natives, and the kind of the theology and also the history of American Christianity in Hawaii. So Kauanoe, over to you. We're so happy to have you with us.
Aloha everyone, and good morning. I hope you can hear me clearly as I try to set up my PowerPoint here.
Yes, we can hear you just fine. Thank you.
All right, let's see what that looks like.
We can see that there. No?
Okay, so if let me see if it looks a little different without the, oh, wow. Okay. All right, everyone. Good morning again. My name is Kauanoe Hoomanawanui. I didn't know how to thematically or educationally put together something that I continue to share about and contributing to my ancestor, but I just kind of thematically chose to share it as Opukaha'ia, which is my ancestor's name, and kind of themed under Kanaka Maoli Theology, which is something new, but not. And so in that, I wanted to kind of go over a little brief history of American Christianity in Hawaii and the ministerial practices before, during, and after among my people. And so this is Opukaha'ia, and I'm a 7th generation once removed. He's first cousins with my ancestor. And on the right, you can kind of see his epitaph, which is located in Cornwall, Connecticut, right off the side of the highway. I can't think of the name. I know what street his house is on, but not of the cemetery. But it's Cornwall Cemetery right before you turn into the little town. It's a lovely place, and I can see why he chose to call that home in his last days. And so as I begin to share with you my beloved Opukaha'ia, I wanted to bring on a revision to his birth date in 1865, where my kupuna or elders responded to Reverend Papaula's newspaper translation by offering new information about the life of Opukaha'ia, and his birth year was revised to 1787 from the estimated amount of date of 1792 that was noted in his memoirs and his own recollection. But through history, we can see that the Battle of Kaipalawa was in August 1796, and it was Kamehameha's last battle as he was conquering Hawaii Island. And this was named in conflict, or where he was named in conflict, and Opukahaia's ancestors were killed off. So Opukahaia's mother was named as Kamoho'ula, kin to Kamehameha, and Reverend Papaula rewrote his Hawaiian language version for a run of 2,000 copies of Ka Mo'olelo o Henry Opukaha'ia, which is the memories or the memoirs of Henry Opukaha'ia. And this slim book was printed by the American Tract Society in New York and published in 1867 for the readers of Hawaii. And so here we can recognize Opukaha'ia was born in 1787 at Kau, here in Hawaii, and died in 1818 at his home in Cornwall, Connecticut. So both of Opukahaia's parents had been slain by warriors of Kamehameha following the Battle of Kaipalawa in Hilo in 1796. But he was pursued, and his little brother, while on his back, was killed by spear from the enemies or Kamehameha's warriors. And so Opukaha'ia was taken prisoner because he was not young enough to give them any trouble nor old enough to excite any fears. And he was not killed. He was later turned over to his uncle, my ancestor Pahua, who took him into his own family and treated him as a child. And Pahua was a kahuna at Hikiau, Heiau in Kealakekua, which is one of our temples. Heiau is what we refer to as temple or sanctuary. And so Opukahaia's uncle, wanting his nephew to follow him as a kahuna, taught Opukaha'ia long prayers and trained him to the task of repeating them daily in the temple of the idol. And this ceremony he sometimes commenced before sunrise in the morning, and at other times was employed in it during the whole or the greater part of the night. And so in outlining Opukah's understandings, I just wanted to finish off this first slide where the dates were changed. And his name kind of transforms from Hia'a, starvation, to Hanale, hunger, and Opukaha'ia, his birth name. And then his New England name, Henry Opukaha'ia. So while he went on the ship on Thaddeus, there was already a native Hawaiian gentleman already on the ship, and he had given him that nickname Hanale or Hia'a in starvation because he was rather needy or wanting or yearning for more. And so the outline that I kind of put together of my understandings of my ancestor features his signature and the American Board Commissions for Foreign Missions certificate for missionaries. And then I wanted to chronologically take you all on a journey from the perspective of my family that was left behind as he sailed away on the Thaddeus and was never returned, and how he took a bold leap of faith away from his family and onto the world that God had sent him to see. So for us, he's pretty much the greatest missionary of his own caliber at the time from our understandings. And so a little brief about my slide. Our archaeological sites are dated between 300, I think that's a typo, but it's 30 to 40 AD. And those sites were located on the south point of Kau in Hawaii Island. And these are early carbon dates, giving us some sort of brief history or a date of when habitation took place in these particular areas. So the earliest dates is 30 to 40 AD, and that's in Haleiwa, Oahu, as far as Kalai Point on the Big Island. And then we can kind of see around the same time Jesus Christ dies, between 30 and 33 AD. And around 1529 to 1542, the ship logs for Lopez de Villalobos and Juan Gatano sail past the Hawaiian Islands and record it in their ship logs. And at the same time, or later on in history, we have the transit of Venus and Captain Cook, which brings him to the Pacific Ocean. And between 1795 and 1810, we have the Hawaiian kingdom made of the 4 independent kingdoms, where Kamehameha conquers the different island kingdoms. And then later on, Kauai joins the group without force. And then you can see Opukah'ia's lifetime from 1792 to 1818. And then we have the foreign mission school that he attended, and that was held between 1816 and 1826. So it didn't last very long, and they ended up burning it down because one of the First Nations, the Cherokee students, hooked up with one of the gold girls of Cornwall, and they ended up burning down the school. And then our churches are developed from the 1820 missionaries, which I'll kind of go over till today with the UCC Hawaii that's formulated in 1959. So that's kind of a fast forward to 2022. All right, so the events during Opukah'ia's childhood following Cook's arrival included a burial service, a Christian burial service that was first recorded as a Christian service, was for a shipmate named William Watman, and he was a seaman aboard the ship that sat in the bay. And just to give you perspective too, Kamehameha the Great was born in 1758 and became king in 1782. And so the island was divided during the battle between Kamehameha and his cousins, which ended by 1810. And so our King Kamehameha the Great died a year after Henry Opukaha'ia in 1819, having finally unified our island chain. And so we kind of dive into the village life in Kealakekua Bay in the 1800s. And you can see Palekapu Keoa Cliff in the backdrop. And these photos capture the space and area Opukaha'ia lived with the rest of my ancestors. Nearby springs providing fresh water to supply the extensive agricultural field systems, as well as the seafood from on and offshore fishing grounds in Kealakekua village. And we had around 2,400 people living among our preserved ancient settlements, as well as modern clusters of home. And so this ethnohistoric accounts share the political and religious administration that were based in this village, and modern capitals, if you will, that included fishing heiau or temples, or heiau of human sacrifice, heiau to worship Lono or Puhina'o Lono at Ka'avaloa, which is all giving thanks to all of the blessings throughout our environment. And so our chiefs' homes were found on the Kekua side of the bay, as well as Hikiau. And so Helehele Okalani was functioning as one of those components in this political and religious sphere of ancient Hawaiian life. And so here you can see an archaeological map with the site of Hikiau Heiau, and then you can kind of see my red arrow where I've located Henry Opukah'ia's little heiau, as he had gradually learned to pray in his own space. And so these are barely there as ancient ruins in the Kealakekua Park if you ever visit the Big Island. And that was his own heiau in the back, Helehele Okalani. And Helehele Okalani is kind of the fast pace to God, kind of following a path at a determined speed in momentum. And so blessed is he that he was, taken away from here and brought into God's space in the East and traveling amongst the Pacific Ocean. And this is kind of what it looks like again. And 100 years after Opukah'ia's death, his heiau, Helehele Okalani, as I mentioned, was desecrated in 1917. So here you can see a newspaper article from June 12th in, I think it was in 2014, where they translated or copied or let us Hokuo Hawaii, where there was a project to where they digitize all of our Hawaiian newspapers, so we're able to have them in this account for me to share to you. So here we can see the article, and I'll just share it with you in my own translation. And so it was posted in June 12th, 2014, and it describes a terrible, mischievous act. And it goes, the Great Heiau, Hikiau, which is near the sands of Kealakekua, is being cleaned up. And while this cleaning was being done, the people working found some burial caves, and in them were neatly placed human bones. They were arranged nicely, and the mouths of the caves were closed over with the rocks. The shocking thing is that the rocks were later removed and the caves were entered, perhaps to be searched for antiquities, or perhaps to desecrate the bones in the caves. And the rocks were piled up inside by some unknown person. The perpetrator of such mischief is not known. However, if the culprit is found, there is a stiff punishment established here for those who desecrate the bones of the dead. The grounds of this heiau were cleaned up because the history of this heiau includes the landing of Captain Cook here, and it will become an attraction for those visiting Hawaii. Also cleaned up was the pathway to the small heiau, where Henry Opukaha'ia was taught the old ways of the kahuna of Hawaii. And this place will become a place visited by world travelers who come to Hawaii. Again, that was published February 1st, 1917. And so let me just take you into a little more intimate journey with my ancestors. Those that were born and raised with Opukaha'ia as his first cousin. And my other tutu, what you see here, is his niece. So on the far left, that's my tutu Kauai Akanoa, and that is first cousins to Henry Opukaha'ia, and that is her daughter on the far right, my tutu Ka'aiali'i, and her husband, my tutu Kuhea. And Ka'aiali'i's husband you see there with the dog. And I'm so grateful that throughout history, certain photographers or people were in the right place and the right time to be able to capture my ancestors, who are probably more camera shy than anything. And so in 1807, 1808, Henry Opukaha'ia was taken aboard the Triumph with Captain Caleb Bretnall, where he found Thomas Hopu, like I shared earlier in his name changes. And he also met Reverend Edwin Wells Dwight in 1809 at the steps of Yale, and took up residence with his uncle, Timothy Dwight, the founder of the ABCFM, or the American Board Commissions for Foreign Missions, and president of Yale University at the time in Hartford, Connecticut. And Henry was converted in 1815, and you can see that church on the bottom left, that's in Torrington, Connecticut. The top right is how Kamakahonu in Kailua Kona looked like when he left, and the ship that he left on. The far left is the Torringford, Connecticut parish, the Church of Christ Congregational, where he was converted and baptized. And so it's a funny thing, because the parishioners preferred Henry to sit in the slave pews high up in the back gallery, where the white people wouldn't have to see people of color. However, the Reverend Samuel Mills insisted that Henry Opukaha'ia remain seated up front, and he had taken the young man under his wing during that time. And you can see the earlier picture of Yale in Hartford. Doesn't look like that anymore, but that's how it used to look like. And so the Haystack meeting, I don't know if anyone's familiar with a lot of our Christian history in America, but the Haystack meeting was in 1806, and it was attended by the Williams College graduates, whom were mentors like the Dwights and the colleagues to Opukaha'ia like Samuel Worcester. And so America's first foreign mission society, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, was formed by Congregationalists in Massachusetts in 1810. And the ABCFM was to bring Christianity and Western culture to non-white people by educating missionaries of their own culture. And in 1961, the American Board merged to form the United Church Board for World Missions, the UCBWM. And after 150 years, the American Board had sent out nearly 5,000 missionaries to 34 different fields. And so in 2000, the UCBWN evolved into the wider church ministries of the United Church of Christ. And it continues to be involved in the mission around the world through the global ministries in partnership with the Division of oversees ministries of the Christian churches or disciples of Christ. And so the life in Cornwall, Connecticut, and New England included a few gentlemen from Hawaii, again with Thomas Hopu, who was already on Britnell's ship, William Kinui, John Honoli'i, and our Prince George Humehume, which is King Kamoli'i of my island's son. And they were all students at the Foreign Mission School. And this Foreign Mission School was supposed to be an educational institution which existed between 1816 and 1826 in Cornwall and created by ABCFM. So Hopu, Kanui, Honoli'i returned to Kailua with 2 other Hawaiians educated at the school. And King Kamoli'i came along as a passenger at 1820 on that ship. And Honoli'i was assigned to Ka'ahumanu Church in Maui. And Kinui was dismissed from the church in 1820 and ended up going to California for the California Gold Rush, trying to be a missionary for the miners. And in 1854, he moved to San Francisco, but lost his life savings in a bank failure. And then he returned to Hawaii in 1863 and died in 1864. So Thomas Hopu went as a missionary with Hiram Bingham and Asa Thurston following their missionary companies here in Hawaii. And so he served as their translator for a number of years. And in his memoirs, which sold around 500,000 copies after his death, Henry's death in 1818, Henry Opukaha'ia wrote, "Oh, what a wonderful thing it is that the hand of the divine providence has brought me from the heathenish darkness here to hear the light of divine truth never had been." And so another memorable thing for one of our Kanaka gentlemen, Thomas Hopu, he met General Andrew Jackson, whom he accompanied to New Orleans. And Hopu actually fought the British during the War of 1812, resulted in him being perhaps one of the first Hawaiians to serve in the United States Armed Forces. And he was an excellent swimmer. And so Hopu saved several crewmen after a shipwreck. And he was supposedly have taken prisoner like 5 times by the British in the West Indies, and once starving in prison, African slaves gave him food and water, affecting Hopu to forever detest the enslavement of Africans. So, again, we praise Juneteenth. So here there's a picture of these gentlemen, the American Board of Foreign Mission Schools, as well as a piece of kapa that Henry Opukaha'ia, so they had a bundle that they kept on their ship, but when they reached to Cornwall, he started taking apart his own kapa and clothing and giving them away. So this is one of the pieces that was given away during his time. And one of the descendants had given it to the Cornwall Museum. We have our little Cornwall Historical Society there in Cornwall. And they really honor Henry Opukaha'ia. We're so blessed. And so his legacy can be seen in his living documents that reside in the Yale Library. Here is a letter to Samuel Wells Jr. in 1817 on June 16th. It's all around this Juneteenth. It's such a great thing as time is all divine. And so the original 1818 version of the memoirs of Henry Opukaha'ia is extremely rare. And the book was reprinted in 1990 and is readily available in public libraries in Hawaii. His written prepositions and adverbs were used to develop the syntax in our Hawaiian language schools. And with the principal studies at the Foreign Mission School being English grammar, the Morse's geography, Dabble's arithmetic, and together with reading, writing, and spelling, about 4 or most of our Hawaiians were already beginning to read and include their own spelling books. And their study hours were beginning from 9 to 12, from 2 to 5, from 8 to 9. And the rules of the school at the FMS were that the scholars should not go to any house or to visit any family in town, can't go to the store, can't visit a friend, can't have people visit. And at the study hour, no students shall go into any other room. So I am guessing they were laboring and studying so many different things, unbeknownst of the consequences that would happen later on. And so in giving instructions to the first missionaries, the ABCFM noted, "You will never forget Opukaha'ia. You will never forget his fervent love, his affectionate counsels, his many prayers, and tears for you and for his and your nation. You saw him die, saw how the Christian could triumph over death and the grave, saw the radiant glory in which he left this world for heaven. You will remember it always, and you will tell it to your kindred and countrymen who are dying without hope. And so on October 23, 1819, the Pioneer Company, the first company of missionaries from the American Board of Foreign Missions from the Northeast US, set sail on the Thaddeus for the Hawaiian Islands. And so here's a scene of Kamehameha's death. The idols were torn down, awaiting a new creator, God, or a new understanding of what was to come, and it surely came in 1819. So on October 23, 1819, the Pioneer Company of Missionaries from the ABCFM set sail on the Thaddeus, and with their instructions, they arrived on March 30, 1820, and awaited acceptance to come on shore for months. On October 4th, from March in 1820, Mrs. Ruggles Holman, who was a missionary's wife on that same boat, states the boat returned with news of King Kamehameha's death, that the worship of idolatry and other heathenship customs are entirely abolished. Such glad news we were not prepared to receive. Truly the Lord hath gone before us in mercy. Her journal writing aboard the Thaddeus. And that's her on the right. These are how the earliest services looked amongst our islands with the first company. And then here is a scene of Kealakekua Bay during the time of the missionaries. So it's quite busy. And here's a letter from King Kamuali'i writing to Samuel Worcester, thanking him for sending his gift, a Bible, to him through his son Humehume upon his arrival back at home. And here is Kai Keopualani Ahu I Ke Kai Makuahine a Kama Kalani Kau Kealanio in 1778, or Keopualani. She survived many trials and tribulations as one of our monarchs among the Hawaiian kingdoms. And so you can see the lamentations for Keopualani at her death in 1823. And here is our Queen Ka'ahumanu. Queen Ka'ahumanu and 6 of our high chiefs requested to be baptized in 1823. Kamehameha died in 1819, and before his death, he appointed his eldest son, Liholiho, to be the next king of the Hawaiian Islands. Liholiho was only 22 years old, and Ka'ahumanu at the time was made Kuhina Nui, or co-ruler to Liholiho, and it was accepted as the great, or she was accepted as the great, and made this decree before his death. The first event that caused the end of the kapu happened, or our religious practices happened a few months after Kamehameha had died. It happened when Liholiho sat down next to his mother, Keopulani, at a feast. And this was kapu. Men and women were not supposed to eat together. They were supposed to eat in separate places. And soon after, Keopulani began eating pork and banana. And this too was forbidden, certain types of foods. And when the others at the feast saw that neither Liholiho nor Keopulani were punished, they too began breaking the kapu. And so in November 1819, 6 months after Kamehameha's death, Liholiho told his messengers to burn all the images of the Hawaiian gods and destroy the heiau, or those sanctuaries that we had earlier worship in. And even though some chiefs and priests fought to keep it alive, this ended the kapu system in Hawaii prior to the missionaries. And so the early effects of missionary presence in Hawaii includes a literacy rate increase in the Hawaiian kingdom. By 1861, Liholiho's younger brother, Kaui Keoli, declared, "O kou aupuni, he aupuni palapala kou. My kingdom shall be a kingdom of literacy." And these readers became writers and were aware that they were creating a legacy to benefit future generations. In a letter printed in Kahokuo Pakipika, that's the Star of the Pacific, and that's one of our earliest newspapers in 1860. 1862. So a gentleman named Kanipu'u wrote, "E makemake ana ka hanauna, Hawaii o na la." And it says the Hawaiian generations of 1870, 1880, 1890, and 1990 are going to want this. They're going to want this, what their ancestors have done. And so here are a number of our earliest churches that were constructed by J.D. Paris's great-grandfather. And he was cousins. He ended up marrying a Hawaiian woman. So all of J.D. Paris's children are all of my cousins. And these are the number of different churches and construction types where we find here today, from our heiau, our earliest temples, to our or now they're way more modern, but these are more our historic churches and our first missionaries landing here. And my ancestors were missionaries who ended up going to the Gilbert Islands. So here's a list of missionaries that ended up leaving. We ended up establishing our own Hawaii missionaries group, and it was under Kekela and his wife Naomi. And Kekela is seen here on the bottom. These are gifts from Abraham Lincoln as he was trained by Reverend Parker and then a pastor at Kuku Church. He saved the life of an American man and was gifted generously from President Lincoln. It was a gold watch, a chain with a new boat, and some other articles. This came out of the Pacific Commercial Advertiser in 1904 in Honolulu. And so my ancestors immediately went out into the field of ministry throughout the Pacific in 1878 and 1883. And you can see their names here. And this is Samuel Kauealoha. Let's see. So 20th century. This is one of the first churches in Hilo that they established. And it was known to have had 1,000 baptismals in one day. So that was just amazing. At one time, we started being evangelized together in understanding what the baptismal is at the time. Everybody definitely followed suit into joining these churches early on with their earlier ministers. And so the 1900s bring about the coffee industry in Kona. And this is how our Ohana continues devotion to our spiritual leadership with Keokua, or God. And so here is a picture of my ancestors. The one on the left, she was raised as a missionary and her siblings were born on missionary in the Gilbert Islands. And that's my ancestor, Kamoli'i. And then that's my grandfather on the bottom right, and his brother, who became an independent evangelist after being part of one of the earliest groups at the Kauai Church under the Reverend Kahale. He developed the Evangelist Fishermen's Group to be a fisher of men in the 1950s, but he wasn't able to, my uncle was not able to recruit my grandfather, the actual fisherman, to his committee. But my ancestors, we have a sacred story of a prophecy by my grandfather, who told my father, and whomever told my grandfather, and all of these people. And so I'll just share this account with you of such a prophecy. And so this event occurred during the time of Kamehameha the Great to an ali'i who lived along the beach near Kona on the Big Island, this area. And the ali'i put a kapu on his village's main heiau in preparation for fishing the waters off of Kona. And so several large fish were sacrificed on the altar of the temple, and a kapu with a death penalty was placed on that particular heiau or temple. And when the men set off to go fishing, two of the ali'i's grandsons, or the chief's grandsons, went into the temple and desecrated it. And so upon discovering what happened, the ali'i sorrowfully ordered warriors to hunt the boys down. However, the boys could not be found. For 5 days, the boys hid in a cave outside the village, and they miraculously, existed without food or water or being undetected by the warriors. And so on the last day of the boys' exile, the chiefs had a prophetic dream, and which he had asked the priest of the village, who served as a prophet, to interpret. And so the ali'i told the prophet that he had a dream of a white child floating in a pastel-colored clouds of a dawn along the Kona coast. And so the prophet said that the child foretold of the coming of a new revelation of the one true God. who would be revealed to the Hawaiians through the teaching of a white-skinned man. And so the ali'i found peace after the prophecy was declared and said his grandsons could live. Anticipating the new revelation, the ali'i destroyed the idols he worshipped and ended the practice of the old Hawaiian religion in his village. So the young boys returned that day, and within the year, missionaries arrived telling of Jesus, a white-skinned man. Cool. And so it's important for us to always connect to our ancestors. So here's my mokuauhau, and I just put that in there for my own reference in how I came about through these people. And so that is my father on the right, or I mean on the left or your right, however that is. And this is my medical records from when I was born. And so my story, kind of in connection to my ancestor, Opukaha'ia means torn from the stomach. Opu is stomach, and kaha'ia is to tear from the stomach. And for me, it begins with an event that took place at my birth and would live with me forever. So the memory of my heritage is scarred upon my own body and leaves me a constant reminder to know myself and my ancestors as they have brought all of us, here together. And we celebrate our indigenous peoples, such as my own. And so in the modern 19th century events, they included the apology to our Hawaiian people from the UCC. In 1993, Reverend Paul Sherry came to Hawaii and apologized on behalf of the First Company's complicities in the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And in so, they gave a little bit of money, which created the Association of Hawaiian Evangelical Churches. That is the association that I kind of work with UCC in preserving and restoring our old Hawaiian churches that were established from the missionary era. And so there have been periodic efforts to bring Opukaha'ia home. And early on, it was by Governor Judd in 1920s. And in 1972, there was an article published in Lakeville saying that the Cornwall people objected and backed down to the governor insisting on bringing Henry home. And so in August 1995, Henry was returned home. My father's cousin had a premonition and decided to bring him home and exhume his body and reintern him here back in Kealakekua. And so the epitaph in Cornwall at the cemetery includes an inscription, "Oh, how I want to see Hawaii, but I think I never shall. God will do right. He knows what is best." They successfully wended their way through the legal entanglements, my family, and we showed that they were related, and we ended up bringing him home back to Hawaii. At the time, I was like 10 and we had the hurricane, so that's kind of where I was. I included that picture because if in my experience, in my day job, I take care of human skeletal remains as a government official and working with repatriations commonly, this particular one, I would have agreed with the Cornwall residents, even with my own ancestor. All right. And so I'm also blessed to be a descendant of the Mayflower. And so I had an adventure through the East Coast and was able to go to DC and look through the rare books to get more of an understanding of my ancestors' writings. And so at the time it was 2017, and our hokulea, which is our canoe that we've navigated around the circumference of the globe completely on the celestial plains. I was able to go there and to be in DC to meet with them. And then while I was speaking with the Cornwall residents and sharing about our 200 years after the passing of my ancestors, as well as the school, that the hokulea would be arriving home shortly after my visit on the East Coast. So while I was there, the hokulea had left the East Coast and had made it back to Hawaii, circumferencing the whole entire globe based on the space. So that was amazing. All right, thank you for bearing with me, everybody. So this is a few more books about the early times of when our Kanakas were at the ABCFM school, and the things that were developed from that included the Hawaiian dictionary, grammar, spelling books. My ancestor began to translate the Bible at first, working from Hebrew to Hawaiian and then English. That's pretty much how he learned English, as he was very disciplined in our Hawaiian language. And he became proficient in English, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and knew geography and mathematics quite well. And so he was accepted in 1814 as a candidate for ministry in the Congregational Churches of Connecticut, and he preached in that area as well. All right, and these are all the number of scholarly books that were depicted at that time. We have Herman Melville with Teepee. He wrote Moby Dick, Noel Webster. Noel Webster compiled a dictionary which became the standard for American English and the spelling book, but it says that he used a manuscript that was found amongst Queen Emma's private papers titled Short Elementary Grammar of Hawaii Language, which was supposedly my ancestors' grammar book. Let's see, and one last thing. This is the home that he passed away at the hands of John Calhoun, who was the doctor at his deathbed. He had passed away from typhus. And this is on Pine Street in Cornwall. And this is the little sign that they have memorializing his time in Cornwall and how they truly adore him. And then we have a newspaper article sharing again how they wanted to establish a statue here in Hawaii of my ancestor. And I think that is all I had for you guys today. Thank you so much for letting me share, you folks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kauanoe. That's amazing. You all can see that she's definitely in a PhD program and has done her research for sure. I know your archaeological expertise is amazing. And it's just so cool knowing that whole connection to your ancestors and having that much material and really being grounded in that way. I think that's amazing. And I know I have just a tiny bit of that I got from my uncle, but otherwise I don't have that kind of grounding. And I think that's just amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us. It was beautiful. I think Bruce and Cheryl have one more song for us. So they'll share and I'll do a closing prayer. And then if folks want to stay after to chat, they'd be more than welcome to. But if you have to go, I totally understand. So thank you. When you're ready, over to you, Bruce and Cheryl.
Pono
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bruce and Cheryl. Friends, let's go forth in love, feeling connection to one another, knowing where we came from, knowing the land that we live on and play on, paying attention to the people around us and where they come from too, knowing that we have these differences, but respecting them and coming to learn how to live together with one another, with our differences, with our stories in a good way. Amen.